Hugh Grant. There's a moment in one of Hugh Grant's talk show appearances where a host tries to compliment him and it completely falls apart. The host says something warm and genuine, and Hugh just stares back and goes, "Well, that sounded phony." Then he pauses, looks around the room, and says, "I'm going to do it again." And somehow, in that tiny, unrehearsed second, he manages to be funnier than most comedians are in an entire set. That right there is Hugh Grant in a nutshell. He's not trying to perform, he's just being himself. And somehow, that's the funniest thing in the room. What makes Hugh Grant such a fascinating person to watch isn't the roles he's played or the films he's starred in. It's the fact that in real life, completely off script, he seems to operate on a frequency that most people simply don't have access to. He's self-deprecating without fishing for compliments. He's sarcastic without being cruel. He's awkward in a way that feels completely deliberate, even when it probably isn't. And the result is that every interview he's ever done feels less like a press junket and more like you're sitting across from an old friend who just happens to have lived an extraordinarily strange and entertaining life. So today, we're diving deep into some of his most memorable public moments. The stories he's told, the things he's admitted, the situations he's found himself in, and the off-the-cuff remarks that have left audiences and hosts completely caught off guard. Because if there's one thing Hugh Grant has proven over the decades, it's that you never quite know what he's going to say next. And honestly, that's exactly what keeps you watching. Let's start with something that tells you everything you need to know about how Hugh handles confrontation. He once told a story about getting into what he described as a manny mood, his word not mine, during some kind of dispute, and feeling emboldened enough to turn to someone nearby and essentially challenge them. The problem was, the person he challenged actually accepted. And not only did they accept, but as Hugh put it, this person was absolutely gigantic. The energy in the room shifted instantly. And so did Hugh's entire approach to the situation. He went from confrontational to peacekeeper in about half a second, suggesting they all calm down. Which, when you think about it, is probably the wisest thing he's ever done. That story is funny not because of what happened, but because of how honestly he tells it. There's no attempt to make himself look cool or heroic. He walked into a situation, realized very quickly he had no business being there, and backed down with grace. Or at least, with survival instincts. Either way, he tells it on himself. And that willingness to be the butt of his own jokes is one of the things that makes him genuinely likable in a way that's hard to manufacture. Now, one of the things that comes up again and again with Hugh in interviews is his name. Specifically, his full name. It turns out that Hugh's middle names include the name Mungo, which is not a name you hear every day. And the discovery of this fact by various hosts over the years has produced some genuinely priceless television. In one appearance, when the name was revealed, the host couldn't help but ask whether he'd been an unusually large baby, as if that might explain the choice. Hugh's response? He blamed his parents. Specifically, he described them as unkind. And then, because he is Hugh Grant, he added that he couldn't entirely explain how it happened. The delivery was so flat and so resigned that the audience loved every second of it. He's spoken about his parents a fair amount over the years, actually. When the subject of his career choice came up in one interview, he mentioned that when he announced he wanted to be an actor, his mother, a church-going teacher, had very different ambitions for him. She apparently wanted him to become the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is, by any measure, a significant pivot from acting in romantic comedies. Hugh told this story with the kind of dry matter-of-factness that made it land perfectly, and then added, completely straight-faced, that he hadn't entirely given up on the idea. It's the kind of throwaway line that most people would miss if they blinked. His fishing story is another one that's become something of a minor classic among people who follow his interviews. He was talking about trying to fish with his brother, who was apparently an excellent fisherman. Hugh, by contrast, struggled. He described a long period of catching absolutely nothing at all. And then, finally, he caught something. The problem was, what he reeled in wasn't a fish. It was a swan. He seemed to be genuinely uncertain whether this was technically legal. But here's the thing. He was so relieved to have caught anything at all that he played it anyway. He described reeling in a swan with the same tone of voice someone might use to describe a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. And that juxtaposition, the absurdity of the situation against the completely calm delivery, is what made the room erupt. Hugh has also talked at some length about the experience of working with other actors, and his approach to discussing colleagues is a little unusual. He's mentioned that he operates under a personal rule of not speaking negatively about anyone he's worked with. Largely, he's admitted, because he's worried they might say something negative about him. It's a policy rooted less in diplomacy and more in self-preservation, which he